Hello and welcome to this discussion on pricing. So in this, I'm going to be talking about different types of price, right? And so this is going to be important because you'll have to set price for your product in marketplace stimulation. So price is a core component of value, and I had on a recording in session 1 or week 1 about value, but it's a ratio of the bundle of benefits that someone receives from an offering compared to the costs that they incur by acquiring that bundle. Price is a little bit more specifically the customer's perception of the offering's pricing, and that's a key determinant of perceived value, which I'll talk about in a second. But developing pricing strategy implies looking at branding and product decisions, service approaches, supply chain, and marketing communication. So value is at the core of marketing, and value, of course, is at the core of pricing. And as I mentioned, and if you looked at that recording that I had, you would see that what we're trying to do in terms of pricing in value is have the value have more benefits to the consumer than they pay in costs, because then it has more value in their eyes. So pricing follows particular process in decision making, right? So these are the elements of managing pricing decisions. First, you establish your objectives and related strategies. You select the pricing tactics. You set the exact price, determine channel discounts and allowances, execute price changes, and understand legal considerations in pricing. This is really kind of after the fact, right? So basically, I will go through these particular steps one by one and start with establishing pricing objectives and related strategies. So pricing objectives are what we hope to get out of a particular type of approach, right? So objectives have to be consistent with our organization overall, with other our marketing related objectives and how we do business, right? So when you think about penetration pricing is used to maximize market share. And it means when I talked about this in the product life cycle, you use penetration product pricing perhaps sometimes at the beginning and when you introduce a product, basically so that it's low. So the price is low, so people will go out and buy it, and then basically you're creating a market share. People say, "Oh, I've tried the product. I'm now a consumer of that product. I'm brand loyal to them, etc." And it attracts though price-sensitive customers, right? And the firm's internal efficiencies lead to costs effective and allows them to lower the price. So basically allows them to do that, right? So if you have a large organization, you can separate costs more easily because um, you're already manufacturing a lot of products, and it's you have that particular cost of each particular element of the overhead associated with a lot of different units, where if you have a small operation, you don't necessarily have that. And as I mentioned, sometimes penetration pricing, these are objectives, are used for new product introduction. But you have to be careful with penetration pricing because price influences customers' perception of quality. And that's when I talk about this particular issue with your particular type of pricing tactic leading to certain kinds of thoughts about your branding, right? So when you think about, this particular type of shoe, it's for $9.99. It's like, how good can it be, really, right? And customers prefer lower prices, not raising it. So that's a danger of penetration pricing because obviously when you lower price, you have low prices, it's hard to increase prices afterwards. If you start at a higher price when you introduce a product, you can always lower it. People are more amenable to that. And changing prices confuses positioning and brand image. If you have a low price point and then you increase it, it's like, well, I thought this was a cheap product. Now I'm paying more for it. I have Blockbuster and Netflix here because Netflix first used a strategy of penetration pricing, really kind of drove out Blockbuster. I mean, there was more going on than that, but that pricing effect actually had some kind of negative impact on the competition because of that. Price skimming is the opposite. So price skimming is a pricing objective. And primarily what you do in price skimming is have a high price at the beginning. And that's because people who are really into the product, right? Those are the people who are in that diffusion of innovation theory kind of approach, are the pioneer purchasers, or they're at least in the you know, they're probably really into the product, so they're going to purchase it first, right? And you're getting first mover advantage by that, so they'll pay more for it, right? And you see that a lot in electronics and pharmaceuticals. It leads to that high level of what they call panache and exclusivity, right? And that's used effectively in niche markets too, with few competitors, because those competitors aren't there, so they can't force down price. So when we price objectives, we're looking at establishing price objectives and related strategies. One of them is profit maximization, that's one, and target return on investment. So we have bottom line profit is set and then a price to meet that target profit, right? So basically we're trying to either maximize our profit, which we might have then this type of price skimming, because we know that pricing the product pretty high, right? Based on our costs. But then target ROI is what is our return that we need to break even, right? So where is that point that what we've spent is then made up by the sales that we've gotten? And that's our target ROI. So we can price to that point when we have certain kinds of expectations of the volume. How much are we going to sell? Then we know some of those inflection points, and we know what's going to get us to that return. So price elasticity of demand is really talking about what consumers buy at that target return on investment price that we have established. That's always a consideration, right? And I'll talk about that elasticity coming up. So a competitor-based pricing is another type of pricing objective. And so basically it's looking at what are the competitors doing and pricing either slightly above or below them. The problem is a price war can occur, and stability pricing is neutral set point that doesn't hurt competitors or endanger the value of the proposition. So basically it's kind of a play it safe approach in pricing. And so I put in not necessarily Delta, but airlines, because airlines follow competitor-based pricing a lot. If they have a certain route that they want to increase price on because they're seeing, passenger increases on that, then they might increase it. And then if they see that the competitors follow suit, then stability is then achieved. If not, then they may lower the price because then they'll see their volume drop in comparison to that of the competitors, and then they go back to the original price. Value pricing is another type of objective, and value pricing overtly attempts to take into account the role of price as it reflects to the bundle of benefits sought by the customer. So a lot of times we consider value pricing, like those shoes I showed in a couple slides ago, low price. But value pricing is also high, right? So Tesla does value pricing. They're really expensive, right? And that's because it's seen as this kind of exquisite, exclusive product. So you have to have pricing that goes along with that, right? It does consider the whole deliverable and all sources of differential advantage. That could be the image, like Tesla, the service that is accompanied with it, product quality, like Toyota and Honda have for their particular types of vehicles that are highly rated, personnel, innovation, all that create that customer value or customer benefit. So you're pricing for all of that in a bundle. Next, we go into not only having those objectives that hopefully meet our overall corporate objectives, like Tesla would be, right? But then we select pricing specific tactics. And these are the tactics, and I'll go through them individually. We'll start with product line pricing. So I have an example here of Luvs and Pampers. I have been changing a lot of diapers, but that's not the reason. These are made by the same company, Procter & Gamble, which is very efficient in terms of and effective in its brand advertising, because you would know it's produced by the same company. But Pampers are the higher end, so they're priced accordingly. Luvs are the lower end, so they're priced differently. So that's what line pricing is. You have different types of product lines within the organization, and you price them differently because there's value, some kind of differential value, I'm not really sure in this particular example what that is, seen in one versus the other, so you have to price them differently. Captive pricing I have here as, like razor blades, right, as an example, because generally like the old model of Gillette and things like that. You buy the handle for cents on the dollar primarily, but the blades are very expensive. So you don't want, obviously once you buy the handle, you had to buy the blades that go into that, and that's called captive pricing. So until like Dollar Shave Club came around and Harry's and things like that, they kind of upended this particular model. But the captive pricing is really something that you have to purchase these. So they price them really high, right? Because they know you have to purchase them to go with that particular type of unit. Price bundling is fairly familiar to us, right? Here is Burger King, rather, five for $4. You get 5 elements, right? The sandwich, the burger, the fries, a cookie, a drink, and whatever that is, all for $4, and that's bundling. If you bought these particular elements by themselves and all individually, you'd pay more than $4. And of course, that is price bundling. Reference pricing is people thinking about how they think about the product pricing. Like, what was the last type of product price I paid for that particular thing? Or what is the competitor charging? Everyone has a reference price in mind. Usually when I buy something, it depends on the product, of course, but a lot of times I go the middle of the road, especially if I'm unfamiliar with the product category. I was like, well, I'm not too sure if this is going to serve my needs or not. I don't want really something low end because I think it's not effective. I don't want something high end because I think it's wasteful. So that's a reference price point. Prestige pricing I talked about with Tesla, but also this Christian Louboutin. I can't say it. It's French. Um, it's a crystal Donna red sneaker, right? So for $3,000. So that is prestige pricing. Of course, I think I mentioned this in a previous recording. This particular brand has red soles, and those are trademarked because they're the only company that can have those legally. Odd even pricing we're fairly familiar with. This is odd pricing, $59.99. This is even pricing, 50 cents. And we see a lot of the odd because $59.99, you look at the 5 first, and consumers see that as being cheaper, obviously, than 60. So that's going to be odd pricing. Even pricing just makes it easier because 50 cents is pretty easy to remember. One price and variable pricing. So a lot of times we have one price that could fit across many different types of people, right? You establish one price for everyone, but then you get a variable pricing, and this is just an example. Like members pay $125. You have an early bird rate for $150. You have non-members paying $350 and a late bird rate of $220. That's for the same kind of service or product, but you're setting different variable pricing based on really kind of the brand loyalty of a particular type of consumer group. EDLP and high-low pricing. EDLP stands for everyday low pricing, and high-low pricing is obviously something I'm going to talk about in a second. But EDLP is like everyday low pricing. Sounds like Walmart at $1, right? So they do tend to establish an EDLP, everyday low pricing, for certain products, right? Most of the products. Here I have high-low pricing where I have certain things that Whole Foods puts on sale, something at 99 cents, California pears, something at $15.99 each. These are special prices, but they have higher prices in the store. So basically, low prices get you in the door, and then the high prices are for things that you may purchase in addition to the lower priced elements. Auction prices, fairly familiar to us through things like eBay. So those are very specific tactical pricing approaches. Next, we set the exact price. So setting the exact price, we have to think about the things that make up our price, right? So a lot of it is cost. So we generally go to thinking about cost first. And so there are particular types of methods of looking at cost and how that builds into the price. So that's what these are. So we set the exact price, right? So we may use these tactics, like the tactics I just showed you here, but think about setting our exact price based on these. So like if we were used to cost plus pricing or markup on cost, we said, well, we're selling razor blades, we're going to use captive pricing. We know our costs for the razor blades are per blade 60 cents, something crazy, probably like that. And they'll say, well, our markup generally is going to be 3,000%, which is probably accurate, right? So they use that particular margin in terms of profit based on that. So you're adding up all your costs and then trying to add a markup on that. That's a markup on cost. We have markup on sales price, which means that we identify a sales price based on maybe the competition or something like that, and say, well, we want to have a markup of 10% on that. So basically, this is a markup on costs. This is a markup setting the sales price first, and then adding to it. We could have average cost. So average cost looks at all the particular types of units that we're producing. What is our average cost for those particular units? And then spreading the cost of producing those across all of those. So that's an average cost pricing methodology. And then target return is very similar to an ROI type of approach, which is a whole strategy. We determine channel discounts and allowances. So discounts and allowances are people within the channel, like a dealer, like a salesperson, right, who has certain kinds of pricing tools at his or her exposure or pleasure to use, right? Discounts are direct, immediate reductions in price provided to the purchasers. Allowances are to the purchasers after the fact. So when you think about certain things, we have cash discounts, we have trade discounts, quantity discounts, seasonal discounts, and promotional allowances. So let me kind of describe those. Cash discounts, of course, are, buy one, get one. You're getting a cash discount. A trade discount happens within the purchasing process. So people who are a wholesaler, they get a discount in order to promote a certain kind of product. Quantity discounts we're pretty familiar with. You buy in bulk and you get a discount rated. Seasonal discounts usually are used at the end of season. So you have certain elements of different types of products at a discount to move them through and get them out of inventory. And promotional allowances are really giving people within the channel dollars in advance of a particular type of an event. So basically, if you're going to be running Ford Motor Company is going to be running a cooperative advertising agreement with its dealers, the Ford Dealers of America or whatever, they will give them a certain amount of allowance to say, okay, you're going to have special incentives on particular types of models, an Explorer or something like that. On these particular end of model year, you're going to knock off a few $1,000s on each particular base model price. But in order to make up for that, we're going to give you an allowance so that you don't have to, you, the dealer, don't have to spend your own money. So we just determine those channel discounts and allowances sometimes based on geography. And these are geographic aspects of pricing, something called free on board pricing, which means basically when you're adding something to transportation, you don't add the transportation cost to it. It's free on board. Uniform delivered pricing, it's uniform across everywhere. Or zone pricing, it's based on different areas within a region. That can be the United States, it can be the Northeast, and you have different zone pricing for certain reasons, right? So a lot of times it's based on just what people are willing to pay. So we know that particular geographic areas, even within the United States, the cost of living is more expensive. It's more expensive in Boston and in New York than it is in other areas, right? So you have zone pricing that looks at that particular type of influence factor. Next, we have execute pricing changes. So once you establish the price, maybe you have to change it. And so a change in offerings price is either up or down, right? You can change it up or down. Earlier in this recording, I said it's hard to go up after you have a low price, but it can dramatically impact the effectiveness of the overall marketing mix variables. Those marketing mix variables are the promotion, the product, and the place. And so it reflects your offerings position in the eyes of the customers. So basically, I said it's very difficult if you have a low price like those shoes I showed for $9.99 to increase the price because people like, well, those were real low value pricing. And so if you're increasing the price, what does it say about that brand, right? So sometimes you want to just have a just noticeable difference, and that means the amount of price increase that can be taken without affecting the customer demand. And so that's primarily saying you can increase it a little bit and it really won't affect how much people purchase of your product. And that's something we'll talk about when we talk about price elasticity. The last thing is understanding legal considerations in pricing, because there are specific laws about pricing, about price fixing, which means collaborating with competitors to fix prices so that there's one price and consumers have to pay that high price. Price discrimination, meaning discriminating against certain groups or certain buyers or certain people because you have an affection for them or something like that. They're close, uh, they're really close to our family or something like that, so we give them a break. That could be illegal. Deceptive pricing, of course, like you offer a price that get people in the door and you don't have that particular element in stock. That's deceptive pricing. Predatory pricing is really not based on the consumer, but based on your competitors. So you actually say, well, I'm going to price my particular product because I'm the biggest guy in the market. I'm going to price my product where it's impossible for other competitors to price it that low, because they don't have the overall kinds of manufacturing approaches that I might have to lower the costs. So you're driving them out of business, and that's predatory pricing. And then, of course, fair trade and minimum markup laws are other types of, have to operate in a fair trade agreements within a competitive environment. And there are minimum markup laws for certain kinds of products. Certain kinds of things are specific to state legislation, like milk prices, right? So there are certain markups available to those particular products. You have to have a minimum price to support really kind of the dairy farms, because it's very cost heavy to actually operate those particular types of operations. Okay, so talking about elasticity, we have inelasticity and elasticity. And I did mention them in the previous slide. So inelastic demand says that if you really change your product price, that the value, the amount of product that people purchase won't change. So this example is envisioned here in this particular table. On the y-axis, we have the price of $10 to $15, and then we have the quantity demanded here. So what we're saying is we're changing the price from 10 at this particular period, right? So this was $10, and when we had that particular priced product at $10, we sold 105 units. Well, then we increased the price, right, to $15, and what did we sell? Well, we sold 100 units, right? So really, we dropped our unit share by 5%. That's not a lot. Over here, we have elastic demand, which says if we change it, it changes a lot. So we have the same $10 to $15 here, but we have a change in quantity here from 150 at 10 to 50 at 15. So that's a much more substantial type of change. So when I look at inelastic demand here, I have things like pharmaceuticals. This is Martin Shkreli. He was once called the most evil man in the U.S. He was a hedge fund operator, right? And he bought Turing Pharmaceuticals and increased the price of those particular pharmaceuticals by something like 400%. And so pharmaceuticals tend to be inelastic because people need those to live. So they actually purchase those in the same or fairly same amount of quantity that they would need anyway, even if the price increases. So if that happens we increase the price of something like steak, there's a lot of substitution for that, right? We could go to other products. And so that tends to be very elastic, which means the volume or the number of things that are purchased changes a lot because the price has changed. So let's talk about marketplace and how to set price. We look at our costs, production, marketing, and overhead. We look at what our profit goals are, what the market will bear, and the competition. Very similar to what I just talked about. So here, when you go into marketplace and the simulation part 2, quarter 2, you'll have to price something. This is what I did for one of my recreational bikes. And you can see, of course, that when I have certain number of units, the cost of those are more expensive because my manufacturing influence has not taken hold, right? So if I have 50 units, it costs me $518 a unit. 100 units drops to 516. If I have 5,000 units, I'm down to 396. Of course, you're going to have to figure out if you can sell all those units, right? So basically, sometimes you want to figure out what is going to be my cost associated with an average of what I expect, right? So there are many startup costs which you'll exceed your revenues. As I mentioned, the product lifecycle kind of approach, your product volumes will be very low at the beginning, resulting in the higher unit costs. But over time, if you sell more, then of course your costs will decrease. And that's what this particular slide shows, that there are no profits, right? You're actually below zero because the setup costs are those one-time costs that are going to be at the introduction period when you have no sales. But then over time, the revenue kicks in. I showed this in the previous recording as well. And so your profits will come later. So this particular shaded area should look like what you have here. It's going to be the same amount. So basically here you have your costs, right? And here you have revenue. So anything in the middle is the profit. This is the product life cycle, which I showed before. So in this particular session, we're talking about Q2. You are here. You have high costs and low demand. And so that ends this particular recording when we talked about price, the different types of processes and approaches we take and think about when we're setting a price.